the only person I feel like has a valid reason to not celebrate Juneteenth is a Confederate citizen. Welcome to my patriotic argument for Juneteenth. I'm John Boyd of Mulatto Munitions. I'm trying something different. My goal is to not read my essay that will be coming out shortly after this video. But my goal is to let's just have a conversation. I'm going to get my ideas out and let's have a good time. So, what is Juneteenth? Juneteenth celebrates June 19th, 1865, when General Granger of the Union Army gets to Galveston, Texas, gathers all the enslaved people, and lets them know that because of Abraham Lincoln signing the Emancipation Proclamation, that the enslaved persons were actually free persons of the United States of America. It's not although this story happens to Black people, this is a story of America. We are a country of many people living together, and one group's story is everybody's story. It's all one big quilt, and we're all weaved together. Sometimes we're fighting each other, sometimes we're uplifting each other. And right now, the story of Juneteenth should be seen as one of uplifting each other. But that moment in time was us uplifting each other. And where we are today is more so some groups trying to push other groups down and not wanting to celebrate their story as if it somehow makes them the villain. So I don't intend to make this a partisan argument. I don't want this to be a left versus right issue. I also don't want to make this about race, although it will be. I think there's a way to have this conversation excluding race as a opponent to this American holiday. Honestly, I think it's patriotic. If you pretend to be someone, I'm not going to put my coded language in there. If you call yourself a freedom-loving, liberty person, any story where someone, especially in America, overcomes an oppressive system to be more free, that's a cause for celebration. The greatest irony is the belief that the Declaration of Independence made us free. That piece of paper being signed was symbolically a day that we became free, but it took lots of death to guarantee our freedom. And it took a lot of work that's still being done to make sure every American citizen is free. So, we can argue that, this is the 250th anniversary of America, but America is still being put together. I know 250 years sounds like a long time for a plane to be built, but we are still building it as we go. And it's not a perfect country. And I think Juneteenth is one of those holidays that celebrates a time where we became more free country. Juneteenth is one of those holidays where we became more free as a country, and we should honor and celebrate that. There's so many more achievements that we celebrate as a country and achievements that we should celebrate as a country. So, arguing against Juneteenth is goofy behavior. So in this first section, I want to talk about exactly what happened. So General Granger arrived in Galveston. He let the enslaved persons know the Emancipation had been signed 2 years earlier by Abraham Lincoln. This was an attempt in the Civil War to take away the revenue generation of the South, and essentially punish the states that rebelled for saying, if you continue this rebellion, you will lose your free labor that you are exploiting. And obviously, Confederates and citizens of the Confederate States were not recognizing the federal government as their government. And so they did not adhere to it. And so it took the Union Army to enforce that connotation. This is one of those misconceptions. Juneteenth does not actually celebrate the last day that persons were enslaved in the United States of America. It celebrates the last day that the Union Army informed enslaved persons of the Confederate States of their freedom. So Delaware, Kentucky, Maryland, and Missouri were still slave states even after the signing of the Emancipation Proclamation because they did not rebel. They were border states of the Confederate States that stayed in the Union. And because of that, Abraham Lincoln did not free their slaves. And it took the ratification of the 13th Amendment to abolish slavery in the United States. So Juneteenth isn't the end of slavery. Juneteenth symbolically represents the death spiral for slavery in America. So I don't get who's not thrilled about that unless you enjoy slavery. So one of my big things is that Juneteenth ultimately, it's not a perfect holiday. It's not a perfect day, but it is a day to celebrate and honor. You know, let's put race into this for a second. If you are a black person and you identify with black history and black culture, it is a day that, especially in the Confederate South, the federal government showed up to make you more free. And I'm going to do a quick tangent. This is why I don't like the federal government. They could have freed every enslaved person in the United States, but they decided to only punish the rebelling states, and they kept it free. They allowed enslaved person in those four border states. But federal government, we got to give you credit. You did the right thing partially. If you are a racist person who doesn't believe that we should celebrate Juneteenth specifically, and you don't believe we should highlight holidays that have a racial connotation to it, you can view this as a day. And I I love seeing this comment on the internet. White people fought to end slavery. Well, this is one of those holidays where white people and their sacrifice as a part of the Union Army fought to free slavery. So, this is an American story. Let's celebrate it. If you want to see it through racial lens, there is a racial lens to see it through as a non-black person. That is exciting. You are the hero of the story. So why does it matter? Juneteenth's first celebration was in 1866 in January, where a lot of these formerly enslaved people held a celebration to honor that June holiday. In my essay, I include a really good PBS video that kind of talks about how religion played a role in that celebration. But it's something that, I love seeing the Confederacy lose. The Confederacy, and as much as people want to claim it was states' rights, the Confederacy was built on the right to own slaves, and the Emancipation completely undercuts that. The Emancipation Proclamation and Juneteenth is very much delegitimizing the Confederate States and the evil institution of slavery. So unless you're a Confederate, which at this point in time you don't need to be, they're still Confederates who are fighting their war for their grandpappy. I'll move on. So I think slavery is one of the darkest chapters in our country, and Juneteenth very much brings it to a close in the Confederate States. So I think one of my big arguments is that one of my key points is you don't have to pretend America's perfect to love it. I love this country. I was raised in a community. I'm the son of a soldier. And so growing up, living on military bases, I was surrounded by people who family members were willing to die for this country. And, that means something. That has an impact on who I am. That shapes my beliefs. Although I criticize this country. I love it to death. I will fight for the people who have no choice but to be here, and I don't plan on abandoning my duty as an American citizen to make this country better. So, I think we should celebrate when we get things right as a country. Uh, the Declaration of Independence, as I said earlier, didn't make us a free country, but it was a symbolic step declaring our intent to be independent. And we had to back that up with firearms. We had to back that up with military action. It is a American tradition that when a law gets made, there is a struggle for enforcement. People test the authority of a law. And so, Juneteenth and the Emancipation Proclamation are one of those other American histories. We talk about desegregation and all these court cases that had to happen for the South to be desegregated. And even after these laws were written, these court cases were won, the U.S. federal government still had to send U.S. Marshals to walk Ruby Bridges to her elementary school that was empty because these people didn't want to integrate, and they were willing to pull their kids out of school to make sure they weren't part of that integration. So one thing that I do want to highlight is, the symbolism of the holiday doesn't have to be specific. It's something that, you know, they they symbolize a full story. So, I've already talked about 4th of July. I want to talk about Memorial Day. Memorial Day is a beautiful day where we celebrate the lives lost fighting in the U.S. military for our country, for our freedom. And the Memorial Day itself doesn't symbolize the day that every soldier died in the country. It's a day that we come together and say, hey, we're going to honor every fallen soldier. Um, Also, Thanksgiving. I know it's a controversial holiday, but the spirit behind it, the symbolism behind it, celebrates the joining of communities. Uh, Thanksgiving's spicy. Uh, I don't want to weigh too much, and if you should or shouldn't celebrate, if you do or don't, uh, shout out to Indigenous people. But Thanksgiving doesn't celebrate, one specific meal that happened. Uh, it's the symbolism behind it. And so, Juneteenth doesn't need to be a perfect day to celebrate the emancipation of enslaved people in America. Uh, so, one of my key points I wanted to hit, slavery didn't instantly disappear on Juneteenth. Again, there were 4 border states in the Union that still were allowed to have slaves. And Juneteenth doesn't capture their story, but it is all brought together. The emancipation and the liberation of Black people is brought together because of Juneteenth. When I was writing the essay for this specific topic, I had this vision in my mind of looking up every argument against Juneteenth and trying to write a philosophical, purely logical response to why those arguments were invalid or weak. I started to look them up, and all of them were undertones of racism. We shouldn't do this as a Black holiday. Uh, we already have a Freedom Day and Juneteenth, and not Juneteenth. We already have a Freedom Day and 4th of July, and we don't need to celebrate this day. Um, and so, there's a few things that I want to call out in those arguments, but I don't want to validate all of those, especially the racist arguments. Um, there's a category of pushback that comes with federal holidays in general and the money associated with federal holidays. So I think it's legitimate to have a discussion of should the US have another day off for a holiday. Um, I'm a civilian. I don't live in the government world. My life is not tied to the government world. I don't. I don't care if the government is open or closed for Memorial Day, whatever. I don't care if our federal holidays are days that the government necessarily shuts down to honor. Um, so if you want to argue that the government should still be open on June 19th, fine, that's your prerogative. I like in the corporate civilian world, there's holidays that are called floating holidays that you're allowed to celebrate a holiday, take a holiday day on any day, and it's your holiday to take, so take it. um I don't want to dive too deep into that. um there's costs associated with government shutting down for a day, and I understand and respect those arguments. I think they're stupid, but as long as you're consistently having that argument for every single day that the government shuts down, then I respect it. But if you're hating on this one because it's the new kid on the block, it was federally recognized as a holiday because of Joe Biden and Congress in 2021. So it is, you know, essentially a new holiday, but this celebrates the freedom, the country becoming more free. And so, you know, if you think this one specifically shouldn't be a holiday, very curious of your intentions behind it. Um, all right, so I want to talk about the dynamic between Juneteenth and the 4th of July. Some people act like Juneteenth is an attempt to replace Independence Day. It's not. July 4th celebrates the founding promise of liberty and justice for all. Juneteenth celebrates America taking a step towards fulfilling that promise. Uh, I think one thing to highlight is that one of those holidays celebrates the words, the other celebrates America getting closer to living up to those words. And essentially, every major milestone in this country is the U.S. aligning more with the principles in our founding, uh, of freedom and justice for all men being created equally, all persons being created equally. Every single time we have a major milestone, we are getting closer to the founding principles found in the Constitution. So, to keep this video short, and I think I'm about to ad lib afterwards, I want to wrap up and I want to talk about my challenge. Uh, this is where I am bringing race into the equation. If you are black, celebrate Juneteenth unapologetically. Do not feel bad. Don't feel like you need to validate why it's a holiday for other people, unless you are someone like me who wants to be a resource for other people. Um, be black. This is a day that celebrates and honors a part of our story in this American fabric. And we should take pride in that, and if you love the government, if you think the government is always right, whatever, this is a day the government got it right for our community, partially. And it's something that, I think as a black person, you should do it. You should celebrate. And celebration could be learning, educating. Uh, it honors the people who endured slavery and the generations who fought to end it. Um, if you are a non-black person, I would encourage you to celebrate with us. There is no reason that you can't reach out to people in your community and find a, Juneteenth celebration somewhere. Here in Indianapolis, the Children's Museum had a free day for everybody, and you don't have to celebrate Juneteenth, but it was a day to go to the Children's Museum for free, and Juneteenth was celebrated at the same time. Um, you don't have to physically celebrate and have a cookout, do whatever. I think Juneteenth, especially with it being a young holiday, it could be if you're a non-black person, a good day to celebrate through learning. Not every day of the year can you focus on a specific story, and the entire country is sharing this experience. So, my recommendation, if you don't know much about the holiday, take an hour out of your day and watch that PBS article. I believe it's Juneteenth, Faith and Freedom, and learn about the story. Learn about how it's impacted our community. Also, as a non-black person, as an American citizen, you don't have to celebrate anything. You don't have to do anything. You're free. I think my beef comes with arguing against Juneteenth as a holiday, and it's taking a very special. You're a very special person if you decide to advocate against a holiday. You're kind of telling that I the only person I feel like has a valid reason to not celebrate Juneteenth is a Confederate citizen. Uh, it's a dark day for you if you are a Confederate. And there's some people who believe they're Confederates. They're traitors, but they believe they're Confederates. So part of the point of Juneteenth is you're free to do whatever you want. The government isn't forcing you to do anything. Uh, so feel free to do whatever you want to do on Juneteenth. You know, I I love this country. I love America. I think America has its tough moments, but I think it uniquely has an ability not only to, if you go to a lot of different countries around the world, I'm going to finish this essay, then I'll come back. Not essay. I'm going to finish this and then I'll come back to it. So when July 4th rolls around, I'll celebrate with you. I'll probably be celebrating louder and prouder than you. Um, and when Juneteenth comes, I hope you'll celebrate with me. Both holidays are a part of America's story. So that's wrapping up the structured part of this video. I'm trying something new, so I appreciate you sticking with me through it. So I want to give a big hug to the Confederates in America today who tie onto this belief that a certain race is superior, and they identify with the Civil War as their battle cry to a time when things were better. There's no non-racist way, in my opinion, to argue for the Confederacy. And, this is a person, I don't hate. I think the Confederate flag is a racist symbol. So in one of my other videos, I talk about, you know, certain symbols and certain outfits make it make it so that I don't trust a person. The Confederate flag is one of those symbols. I grew up seeing clips of Dukes of Hazzard. I'm not going to pretend we watched it. The General Lee symbolized an anti-government sentiment. A person who claims to fly a Confederate flag because they are anti-government. I'm anti-government too, and I understand why you believe the Confederate flag symbolizes anti-government. The Confederate flag, especially in the 1960s, was repurposed to be a anti-black, pro-white symbol. The Confederacy lasted 4 years. I'm pretty sure 4 years. That flag still flying today is a joke. It's a joke. It is a traitorous flag that there are millions and millions of flags in the world. There was only one that carved out a chunk of America and flew opposite of our red, white, and blue. And that is the Confederate flag. So how people can wave an American flag and wave a Confederate flag is hysterical to me. Those flags are active enemies. If the South were to rise again, they would be at war. They would be in conflict with the United States. So, pick your side. Either fly your Confederate flag and your Trump flag or fly your American flag. But don't pretend like you are a proud American while flying the flag of a treasonous country. I'm trying something new, so I might wrap up here. Juneteenth, it is a symbol. It is a black story. And, if you're arguing against Juneteenth instinctively, I hope you ask yourself why. Why does messing with someone else's day, how does that improve my life? How is my life negatively impacted by telling an American story where we included more people in that freedom aspect? Juneteenth is not Independence Day. Independence Day didn't make everyone free. It didn't make everyone a citizen. Again, we had to fight for our right to be a free country opposite of the British. I think I'm going to make a 4th of July video that dives more into the milestones of us becoming a more free union. Yeah, I'm going to wrap up there. Thank you for your time. I'm Chad of Mulatto Munitions. Find me Instagram, YouTube, TikTok. Those are the big 3. Thank you.